The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ben Siegel. I want to welcome you to our webinar on preparing for a data breach today. I just wanted to go over a few of the things we're going to be doing, basically the sort of housekeeping items here. So the first thing we'll be doing is I'll just be giving you a quick review of Privacy Ref and the things we do, what our services are, and then I'll introduce and hand over the presentation to Bob Siegel, who will take it from there, and then we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation as well. As just sort of the general information, we'll be handing out a copy or emailing a copy of the slides to this presentation to you at the end of the presentation. During the presentation, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the question box that is inside of the GoToMeeting interface. And as well, we'll also be asking that if you have Twitter, or if you're on Twitter, you can use the hashtag PrivacyRef or just @PrivacyRef to ask us questions there as well. We'll definitely try to answer as many as we possibly can. If we don't answer yours, we'll be sure to follow up with you on it as well. Finally, at the end of the presentation, we will be sending out a survey, or there will be a survey for you to fill out. Please make sure you fill that out. It gives us a good idea of some of the other questions you might have or possible ideas for other webinars that you might be interested in that we can do in the future. Now, about Privacy Ref, we're actually a privacy consultancy, and we focus on the development and implementation of privacy policies for our clients. We've helped organizations adjust and adapt to new regulations and government policy, and have our focus in 3 different areas, such as assessments, consulting, and training. We've worked with a variety of different clients in different areas, from insurance to augmented reality applications as well, on mobile applications. Introducing Bob Siegel. He's Privacy Ref's founder and CEO and has extensive professional experience in the development of privacy policies and procedures, the definition of performance metrics to evaluate privacy maturity, and the evaluation of compliance. He has an extensive experience with PCI DSS and Safe Harbor, and has deep subject matter knowledge surrounding key laws and regulations regarding consumer privacy and information security. Bob's a certified information privacy professional, awarded from the International Association of Privacy Professionals, with concentration in U.S. law, Canadian law, information technology practices, as well as being a certified information privacy manager. He's a member of the IIPP's faculty, having trained over 10% of the IIPP's membership, and has served on the Certification Advisory Board for its Certified Information Privacy Manager program. Most recently, Bob served as the Senior Manager of Worldwide Privacy and Compliance for Staples, a Fortune 150 retailer of office supplies, where his responsibilities included development awareness and compliance of global privacy-related policies and procedures for more than 60 business units in 26 different countries. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Bob, and he'll take it from there.
Thanks, Ben. I want to welcome everybody again to today's presentation. Every time recently that I've been following the news, almost on a daily basis, there have been more and more breaches reported. And the way companies have been reporting them has been improving. If you look at the way Target handled the announcement of their breach and the status of what was going on, compared to, say, how Home Depot has handled theirs, there was a vast difference between how the 2 organizations publicly disclosed what was going on. To their benefit, I think. And I think that was reflected not only in the actions they took, but also you can see how the impact of the breach announcements and the breach handling impacted the company's stock prices. So what we're going to do today is take a look at the putting together an incident management plan, a crisis management plan, if you will, in the event that you do have a data breach. Now, this comes from a document called Plan to Failure from Forrester Research back in 2011, but I still think it's valid today. During the previous 12 months, they said that they found that 25% of companies have experienced some kind of data breach. This, if you take the sources, assuming the information is the same, the Punterman Institute just a few weeks ago indicated that in 2013, 43% of all companies experience some sort of data breach. Now, a data breach can be anything as simple as losing a set of papers with personal information on them, up into including the loss of a major amount of data, similar to what some of those companies whose logos were on the front page showed. But in any event, regardless of which way you go, there are certainly significant impacts on your organization. The impacts will be financial, because you have to worry about potential fines you may have to pay, remediation costs, including the forensic analysis. You need to notify all of the affected data subjects who were impacted by the breach, potentially also supplying them with some sort of identity theft protection. You may need to set up a call center to handle questions and calls from them. In fact, if you look at what Target spent last quarter, a full quarter removed from the breach, it was $156 million. It was a huge amount that may impact your business. So there's, as the slide says, with the number of data breaches that are occurring and the laws for notification consistently increasing, you've got no choice but to have some sort of incident management program in place. And if you don't have one, it's something you should really look into immediately. So here are some questions for you. How do your employees notify you of a potential data breach event? Do they use the normal incident reporting mechanisms you have on the help desk? Are there some of the ways that you have that, such as emails maybe going to your privacy office? Do you have a way to have those employees report them anonymously so they feel comfortable in providing that sort of information to you? Who determines whether a breach has occurred or not? There are often situations where you may think a data breach has occurred, but in fact none has really happened. How is the analysis performed? How do you prevent future data breaches of the same kind? Do you have a plan in place to make that happen? And most importantly, as we've seen through the example cited previously, how are your external communications coordinated? Who has responsibility for that in your organization? And if you do have a plan in place already, how do you test that plan? The fact of the matter is that if you're in the midst of a data breach and you don't have a plan to follow, if you haven't tested a plan or an approach to dealing with it, you're going to be shooting from the hip. And if you're just shooting from the hip, you're going to be reacting, and chances are your response is just going to be all mixed up. As Ben mentioned, if you have any questions during this presentation, there is a questions box in the control panel from GoToMeeting. Please feel free to use it, and Ben is monitoring that, and we could answer questions as we go along. In front of you now, you see a simplified event management process. An incident occurs, maybe it's handled by the help desk initially, maybe there's some other process that's followed. But the key is you should follow your standard incident management processes for the organization. The idea is that your staff should not have to learn something new as far as reporting a breach incident. They should be able to follow processes that they know on a day-to-day basis so that they're familiar with it. The incident management process you have in place probably provides logging and tracking services. Typically, those incident management processes at a help desk include the creation of a ticket, assigning it, tracking the progress, resolving the issue, and closing the ticket. This is great. This is the same type of thing you'd want in place in case a privacy incident occurs. However, you should be aware that because there may be legal implications and regulatory implications with a breach incident, you may not want to disclose as much information as you do normally in your help desk ticket tracking system. You may want to refine what's kept there and maybe have some other alternative for providing that tracking mechanism. We'll talk about that more in this section. In next slide. The related processes to help desk-based incident management processes are often very metric-centric. Having managed a help desk in my career, we were very focused on what our close rate was, how quickly we were, or what percentage of situations or calls and tickets we can close in a short amount of time, and how low that time was, and how quickly we were able to respond to a situation. That's probably not indicative of what you want to have drive your incident management process from a data breach standpoint. If you have a data breach event, you want to make sure that the response time is quick, that you stop the bleeding, if you will, of the incident as quickly as possible. But you want to take a careful and thoughtful process in making sure not only is the technical issue addressed and diagnosed and prevented in the future, but also that each of your data subjects is properly informed and kept as a good customer. The fact is that research has shown that in 2013, companies that have had data breach have lost 3.2% of their customer base. Now, I'd suggest that depending upon the industry you're in, there could be a very different recovery time for those customers. Say, for example, you're in the retail industry. Say you were Target, or the most recent breach that was announced, Staples. People have to make a decision about where to purchase from a retailer on a very frequent basis, maybe several times a month. And if they go into one of those retailers, they have a choice to decide whether or not they're going to use their credit cards or they're going to shop anonymously using cash. So you may have a fairly rapid recovery time for retailers. And you could see that in the TJX breach that happened several years ago, that their revenues and their customer base recovered at a rather rapid basis. On the other hand, you may find that in other industries, say like financial services, if you're selling insurance or supplying banking services, you may not get that rapid return of customers. Because think of the number of times you make a decision on who you have insurance with every year or who you're banking with each year. Maybe it's once, at most twice a year, that you have those thoughts. So having an incident management process in place that focuses on quick resolution time, quick response time, quick close time probably isn't the right way to go for a data breach situation. You want to make sure that your customers are protected, that they're satisfied, and that way they'll hopefully not leave you, and if they do, come back to you quickly. Now, if the incident management process you have in place is owned by the IT organization, it's going to focus on data processing incidents. They may not know how to handle something like a data breach. Usually, the IT processes are internally focused, meaning a server is down, I'm not getting my mail, I've forgotten my password, my laptop is locked up. However, this situation with a data breach, it's more externally focused. You have to worry about what the public outside is seeing while still retaining that internal focus on stopping the bleeding and preventing the issue in the future. Also, IT may not be focused on paper-based issues. Data breaches are very simple. One of my clients talked about one of his agents, one of his sales representatives, leaving his briefcase on the roof of his car one day while he was putting some other things in the trunk. He closed the trunk, got in the car, and drove away. And when he reached the highway, the briefcase fell off the roof of the car, spreading all sorts of personal information along the highway. That's a data breach. If your IT help desk received that notice, are they going to know how to respond? Probably not. So there needs to be another way. Once the incident does occur, you want to stop the bleeding, as I've said before. First step is to isolate the system or business process that's been affected. While isolating it, you want to make sure that that environment is forensically protected so that either someone in your organization or if you have outside resources coming in to help out, they could diagnose the problem and track down what happened, how to prevent it in the future, and possibly even find some tracks, if you will, to who the perpetrator was. All of this has to happen while allowing the business to continue. Just because you've shut down a particular server, just because a system is unavailable, you still have to generate revenue, even while the investigation is going on. So make sure that you either have duplicate systems in place, a hot standby, an alternative business process if that's the case, all to allow the business to continue. And certainly have backups in place of the systems, because possibly you can go back to prior to when the incident occurred and start recreating systems like that as well. Okay. So there's certain questions you should ask. How are yourself? How are non-IT events managed? The owners of the incident management process should be able to give you that answer. If somebody calls in and says their briefcase got lost or their briefcase got stolen, they should be able to tell you what they would do with that. Is there business process expertise immediately available to that help desk, or do you have a process for assigning it? If the incident reports come from outside the organization, are they going to go to your customer service desk? Are they going to go to a sales rep? Depending on the model of your business, you've got to think about where customers would most likely go with that information, and make sure that the individuals who received the incident reports know what they're supposed to do with it. Because one of the things that could happen is that, say, a sales rep hears about a breach and he doesn't know what to do about it. He'll escalate it to his management and so on until it eventually reaches the chief privacy officer or the CIO, and then they'll start taking action. The time that's lost may make the difference between a large amount or a small amount of information being lost. It also may make the difference about how the forensic analysis can occur to make things easier to resolve. Do you have a way for events to be anonymously reported? Unfortunately, there are individuals in every organization, when something bad occurs, they want to cover it up. And you would have someone else, potentially somebody who reports to a manager who may be of that frame of mind, who wants to do the right thing. But they're afraid to report the incident because of any repercussions from the manager. So having a mechanism to anonymously report events should be in place. You can leverage an ethics line if you have that in place for your organization. But again, that means teaching the people responsible for the ethics line how to report the incidents back properly to see actions are taken. The next question is, when a ticket's created, how many people get to see it? Privacy incidents or data breaches are things that you don't want a lot of people to have access to, how things happen, and what the resolution is. So you may want to limit the access to the systems. And many help desk or service management systems have the ability to restrict how many people can see any particular ticket. And finally, do you run test scenarios? Testing your plans is critical to be able to successfully manage an incident. We'll talk more about that later. So once the incident management process is followed, hopefully part of that is to escalate a breach incident to the chief privacy officer and chief security officer. It's up to them to decide if it's a data breach or not. And that can only be done based on the information that they know at that time. It may be that they think one might happen, they're looking for additional information. It may be that you're just not sure if one occurred, or alternatively they may be able to definitely rule it out. For example, in some cases, a lost laptop, for example, you know it's lost. So there is a potential incident there right away. The chief privacy officer can make that decision. If a laptop was lost and then it was returned, it's a little vaguer because you don't know if anybody accessed the data that was in that laptop. You can do some forensic analysis to determine that and then make a decision whether a breach actually occurred or not. But someone, especially for a major event at the C level, the CISO or the CPO, should make a decision about whether or not a breach has occurred, because there's going to be a large investment in what's going to happen next. That would include determining the scope of the event, identifying the risks and responsibilities, and to coordinate remediation. And the best way to do that is to create an event management team. The event management team is cross-functional. It determines how big the event is, coordinates the remediation effort. The core team should consist of various organizational members. Legal should absolutely be involved. Privacy office, if that is separate from the legal team. The compliance group, your incident management team that initially received the event, your IT organization, in case it was an IT event. But you may add other members based on the situation. If the event happened to occur at a store or set of stores in the retail organization, you probably want to have someone from the retail organization. There probably somebody from the loss management team. The event management team should be led by the chief privacy officer, and in addition to coordinating the efforts of all those core members, the chief privacy officer would be responsible for managing the budget and managing vendors. Now, in this case, the vendors I'm referring to are vendors you may hire to help with the analysis and notification that the event occurred. You may have these talents in-house, but more often than not, you don't. These resources are tied up on other things at the time. You can pull them off the things that they're working on, or you can supplement them with outside third parties. And there are a number of different vendors out there that will come in and provide an entire package for how to manage a breach for you, working with your event management team as well as the chief privacy officer. From a budgetary perspective, often I see organizations taking budget away from other activities when a breach occurs. You should have a budget in place, a budget line in place to handle breaches in the event that one does occur. That way you're not scrambling for money, scrambling for funding in order to hire these vendors or performing other activities related to a breach at the time they do occur. That breach management team should be gathering information quickly. Again, part of this is to confirm whether or not the breach actually occurred and how widespread it is. First of all, find out what information was lost. Was it really personal information? Also, you could figure out how sensitive that information was. So, for example, if names and address was lost, it's a very different event than if a name and a credit card or a name and other financial information was lost, or health information, something that's becoming more and more profitable for people to deal with. Was the data encrypted? If the data was encrypted, most U.S. state laws recognize that encrypted data is not personal information, and that will change if you have to notify attorneys general, law enforcement, or the data subjects. So it's an important piece of information to gather. You want to know how much data was lost. Was it 10 records or records for 10 data subjects? Was it records for 1,000 data subjects? That would have an impact on how you notify the individuals. Has the data loss been stopped? So the event management team should stay on top of whatever activities are happening to rectify the situation and be able to make a statement, yes, it's been stopped or not, and help provide guidance whether or not maybe that particular business function should be shut down temporarily. Figure out when the loss first occurred. Often the target of a data breach or a hacking situation doesn't realize that a breach has occurred. Sometimes it takes a customer knocking on the door and saying their credit card has been misused and it's been able to be tied back to their particular site or their particular company. Sometimes it's law enforcement like the Secret Service knocking on your door, or more recently, maybe it's a journalist like Krebs Security who announces that they saw credit cards used being sold online from your company. So you need to tie back to when the loss first started occurring. That will help you identify the scope. You want to identify where it was lost. Was the information lost at a storefront in one particular state? Was it lost from your data center here in the U.S.? If it was lost overseas, that would have a difference as well. That has an impact on which laws are applicable to notification of data subjects. You need to determine who was affected and where they live. Within the U.S., the state data breach laws are all based upon what state the data subject is the resident of. Can the data be recovered? Can it be verified whether or not the data was actually looked at or not? In the case of a lost laptop and lost papers, that's very, very applicable. You need to identify the applicable laws. Legal will certainly help with that, but your privacy office should be familiar enough with how to dissect a law to determine what's appropriate. Identify the notification requirements. If there are impacts to other applications that you are running, you want to know that as well. Because if the data loss is, say, the credentials for your internal users to do remote access to systems, you probably want to cut off access to the internet fairly quickly to keep people from working remotely, people from outside accessing your systems. Similarly, for customers, you may have a couple of different applications in place for them. Maybe one that does just general customer service while the other one is providing access to detailed account information. If they share user IDs and passwords or other personal information, you want to know that to decide if you have to take actions for those other applications as well. And also, as a good citizen, it's a good idea to understand the impact to other organizations as well. For example, if you lose email addresses of your customers, you may not think that it's a really big deal, but it will turn out that email address is used as half the credentials for people to sign into accounts within other organizations. So you probably want to notify people that their email accounts were impacted, and there may be impacts to other organizations as well because of that. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Once the event management team is in place and it's decided that the scope is large enough to cause essentially a crisis to be declared, a significant event to be declared, and that there's a large number of people involved, that there is going to be some public relations involved, you're going to want to invoke your event communication plan. Now, this thing is focused on how all communications to stakeholders is coordinated, and the stakeholder group is very, very large, as you'll see. The communication plan itself identifies who's the members of the event communication team are going to be. Is it going to be someone from your PR organization, your marketing organization? Certainly the privacy and legal teams will be involved, and so on. It contains contact information for the members of that team, because you never can tell when you're going to need to get in touch with them. So it should be certainly their mobile phones, office phones, potentially home phones as well, and email addresses that they could be reached at. There should also be the identification of secondary members. People do go on vacation, people are unreachable, people do get ill and can't participate. But you always want to have their views, their organizations represented. So it's important to have those secondary members in place. The real purpose of the communication plan is twofold. It defines who talks to whom and when. Who's responsible for talking to law enforcement? Who's responsible for talking to the press? Who's responsible for talking to employees? And also contains the framework for the communication. What needs to be considered when the communication is done? What does the press release look like? How much are you going to share? How much are you going to keep to yourself? So, for example, the communication team stakeholders, the people that are going to have to be engaged with, are certainly customers, employees, the marketing department. If it's large enough media, certainly law enforcement, other government officials such as the attorneys general. Oftentimes, if the breach is large enough, credit reporting agencies as well. And certainly, if you're a public company, your investors are going to want to know what's going on. To that effect, the team members that you're going to want to have in place are the marketing department, so a representative from the marketing department and public relations. Since we're talking about communications here, though one of those two individuals should be the lead for this team, as opposed to the event management team, which is more technical, more privacy oriented. You're going to want to have representation from sales, for business development, to help particularly to talk to large customers. You want to have customer service involved, because customer service will have to answer questions from customers about what happened. You want to have internal communications involved to help talk to the employees. Security and loss prevention, legal, investor relations, and of course the privacy office all should be members of these teams. They all have roles to fill throughout the discussion of the event and how to communicate it. The communications plan should identify who the spokespeople are going to be. Particularly, you want to make sure that whoever is designated to talk to a particular set of stakeholders are the only ones that talk to those stakeholders. So if someone from security or loss prevention is responsible for talking to law enforcement, when a query is made from law enforcement to, say, the privacy office or to the legal team, it should be redirected back to security or loss prevention. The team should also review every message that's going out. There should be consistent messaging. You want to make sure that a message that you give internally, which may have some more details than you release publicly, supports what you've been releasing publicly. Because there will be times when your team members will be talking separately, talking out of school, if you will, based on information that they've heard out in the field. Throughout this, executive leadership should be kept informed. The chairs of both teams, the communications team as well as the management team, should both be updating the executives about what they found. And they should share information with each other, so essentially they're in sync as well. there is going to be a tendency to want to use the executives to come out and give a statement. That's good. It's nice. It's nice to see the head of the organization, rightfully the head of the organization, for example, take responsibility for what's happening and assuring the public that he's going to make sure or she's going to make sure that the incident's resolved. However, I would make sure that you are solid in your facts and solid in your plan before you put an executive out there. You don't want to put them into a situation where they may be embarrassed by differing information coming out later or a separate plan being defined at a later time. Now, when you're developing your plan, you're developing a framework for how to handle the crisis communication. Most communications could actually be pre-written. The only different detail that's removed are the specific things that happen during the event, and those can be added when the event occurs. So, for example, the basic text of your press release, letters to customers, what you're going to show on the website, what you can tell employees, can all be pre-written. And then leaving room for a paragraph or a few sentences or phrases interjected in that template at various times, various places to talk about what actually happened. Also, there will be talking points available for the media that you'll create. Those can mostly be pre-written, and then based on what event occurred, some could be removed from the talking points that are distributed for the various spokespeople to use, or things can be added or things can be enhanced on. The idea here is not to put pressure on the teams that would develop this content during the time of the breach, giving them only a few hours or to respond. If the vast majority of the content is pre-written, it gives them a chance to really refine on what the true message is, not necessarily everything else that's surrounding it. Okay. Finally, you've got your plan in place. It's time to test it. What you want to do is test your plan a couple of times a year, and so that the participants understand what their responsibilities are, and in the event of a breach, it does become more muscle memory, if you will, to make sure that they actually understand what's happening and how to work and what their responsibilities are. They should also get their secondary folks involved, their backups involved, so that they understand what's going to happen. And there are two common types of testing. The one that's most common is the tabletop exercise. What we do with our clients is we define with the privacy office or the legal team multiple scenarios. And we'll get all the key participants together for, say, half a day, and we'll start with the first scenario. We'll present the situation, and the first question is, who was the situation reported to? If it was customer service, we'll turn to the customer service person and say, what are you going to do? While this discussion is going on, there's someone available who's following what's in the event management plan to see if what the actions being described at the tabletop exercise do actually match what's in the plan. And if there are deviations, they're noted. And as you go through the full scenario, questions can be asked by that person taking those notes why they took that deviation as opposed to what was in the plan. It may very well be that the plan just doesn't work in practice, and the test will help bring that out so the plan can be updated later. The other way, which is a little bit riskier but more true to life, is a scenario exercise. You define a single scenario, and at the beginning of the day, you notify everyone that's involved that you are doing this exercise. And that's key, because if you don't notify people who are participating that's an exercise, they'll take it as a real life situation, and that just spells trouble all over it. The event progresses. Production processes and tools are used to manage the event, albeit signal that this is a test. And you watch how the event unfolds, again, looking at the various plans that are involved, watching to make sure the communication is done properly. At the end of the day, the key participants get together to debrief. Again, it's very critical if you're using the situation to let people know that this is a test. It's only a test, because you don't want to stir up any trouble within the organization. You don't want to stir up any reaction that's over the top for a test, because people do think it's live. And finally, after each event, you need to debrief. You need to review how the organization did. This can be measured by external metrics like stock price, like the number of articles that were written. Just looking at how the journalists, how the bloggers are reacting to how the event was handled is a really good measure of what's going on. Because they don't have the view of what's happening internally, they can take a look and actually review it and say from an external perspective that this was good, this was bad, glad it happened, or wish it didn't. Obviously, you'll be able to see what kind of information is being leaked at the same time. You want to review your expenditures. Did you spend the money in the right way? Did you spend it efficiently? Were you prepared? Did you have a forensics team pre-contracted with? Did you have a PR team pre-contracted with to help you with this event? If not, you're probably going to pay a premium to get them on board, so you may want to pre-contract with them just in case something occurs. You want to compare how things were implemented, how things were done versus what the plan says, and of course, getting back to the journalists and bloggers, what the public perceptions were. There should always be a lessons learned document. This is what we saw, this is what we did, this is what we could have done better the next time. And then based on that, go back and update the plan and run a test of the new plan. Because you're always going to learn something each time an event like this occurs. And unfortunately, nothing ever goes as smoothly as you'd like it to. There's always going to be some bumps in the road during this. But having most of the implementation efforts scoped out, planned out, it'll lessen the number of bumps and allow you to really focus on where the major hiccups are. There's a couple of other considerations I'd like you to think about. Number one is the system of record. In the beginning, we talked about the organization's information management system. It's a great way to initially record the information, but probably not the best way to record things as the system or the events progress. Because the more you put in there, the more is going to be essentially available to the majority of your organization. A separate incident management system may be a good way to take a look at that. Something that's managed either by the privacy office or potentially legal. Because some of the items that you're discussing, some of the things that you're recording, you probably want to make attorney work product to protect it during discovery. There are a couple of tools out there that help with that. The one that I'm most familiar with that does help in the case of a data breach is from CO3 Systems, Co3 Systems. That they will even help you. Their system will even help you determine whether a breach occurred or not. You need to figure out what your methods of communication are within your organization. Are things going to be told by phone? Are you going to write memos? Are you going to do things in email? Again, to a large extent, it gets to what gets put in paper and what's discoverable during the process, who knew what when. And finally, you need to figure out how to deal with independent divisions. Many large companies will have a corporate structure and then have divisions for the U.S., and then each of the countries involved that they have, say, a European division, maybe an Australian division, an Asia-Pacific division. When a breach occurs in any of those regions below the corporate level, who's responsible for addressing it? Who's responsible for responding to it? I'd suggest you probably want to have a concerted effort that goes corporate-wide, so it should be handled at the corporate level, because it's really the brand that's being damaged, not the brand business unit in a particular country. You also need to look at acquired businesses. They may not yet be up to snuff, if you will, when compared to your own privacy practices. So you need to figure out how to get them to be compliant with everything you've done. You need to figure out how to handle breaches on their part as opposed to the breach plans that they had in place before. So there's certain retraining that has to do. And you may not have changed the brand on that company yet. You see companies retaining brands either after acquisition. Skype, for example, you still refer to as Skype, not as Microsoft. So if there was a breach of Skype, you'd expect that the breach is going to be handled within their organization and not spread to the Microsoft brand. But you still have to figure out how's the right way to handle the breach, because I would suggest it still needs corporate attention. So Over the past 45 minutes or so, we've been going over a very simplified event management process. There are a number of things that you can do with creating your privacy program to help understand the extent of a breach and how you can respond. Things like doing a data inventory, establishing a privacy policy that relates back to laws and regulations, including those related to breach that you may have to reference during the time of event. All those things we could talk about, we do talk about, in fact, under another webinar called Kickstarting a Privacy Program, but certainly be willing to and anxious to have a conversation with you as part of just the services we provide and share that kind of information with you. For next steps, I'd suggest to create or review your breach response processes. Take a look at the intake steps, the escalation procedures, the communication plans, and how roles and responsibilities are defined within your organization. Have there been changes in your organization lately, and how do you keep that plan and the roles and responsibilities up to date relative to those changes in your organization? Test your procedures often, at least twice a year, and then make updates as necessary. And finally, we at Privacy Ref invite you to take advantage of a 30-minute consultation. We can talk about your breach plan and questions you may have that you prefer to ask offline, or we could talk about establishing a privacy program or any other situation that you feel you'd like some guidance on. To have one scheduled, just email info@privacyref.com, and we'll be in touch with you to put something on the calendar. So Ben, are there any questions that you've seen that we could respond to?
Yeah, I do have a few. The first one I have is, what differences have you seen in how companies prepare for data breaches with recent events and recent breaches such as Target, Home Depot, or Staples?
Could you repeat that again? There was a lot there.
Sorry. The question is, what are the differences that you've seen in how companies prepare for a breach in response to the Target, the Home Depot, or the Staples breach?
Well, what I've seen is really openness and disclosure about what's happened. Let's take Target, Home Depot, and Staples, for example, and we could throw in Goodwill as well. When the Target breach occurred, it occurred towards the end of or was publicly released at the high point of their business cycle, and it appeared from the outside is that they weren't being as forthcoming about what occurred. It may be that they were forthcoming, but it just appeared by the way the information was released in bits and pieces that they just weren't being as open as some organizations were. In the case of both Staples and Home Depot, what you saw was that a third party, I think in both cases it was Krebs on Security, had posted in their blog that they'd seen credit cards that were being exposed from these companies. Both companies didn't know that something had happened, and they'd taken the time to see what was really going on within their organization. That things what caused the breach, or in fact that a breach did occur. In Home Depot's case, they did the research and eventually said, yes, a breach did occur, and started sharing some of the parameters and what they were going to do about it. In Staples' case, the first thing they announced is that the breach appeared to happen only in 7 stores in the Northeast. So that gave customers around the country a little bit more security, if you will, about what was going on. So they were being upfront about it. Goodwill was similar. When they found out that there was a breach, they looked into it and they discovered that the breach occurred at their hosting vendor, that it wasn't within their internal systems. It was something at the hosting vendor, and they started to discuss what was going on there. Hope that answers the question. Are there other questions?
I also have, in your experience, do you have good examples or bad examples of how to handle journalists or other media in result of a leak or privacy-related event?
Oh, good. Luckily, I haven't been directly involved with the journalists and the media. I mean, there are PR specialists to do that all the time. When I worked at Staples, clearly it was the PR organization that took care of it. For smaller organizations, you may want to bring in a PR consultant. For example, one organization I'm familiar with that does this kind of crisis management is Fletcher Media. They've done this for other organizations, before. In the case of a breach situation, they work with Days Jewelers and appear to do a phenomenal job with them. So I would look to organizations or people that specialize in dealing with media and journalists. My only advice is to be open and transparent, because if you're not going to supply the information that they're looking for, the journalists are certainly going to get it from somewhere else. There's going to be someone in your organization who's going to want to share information you don't necessarily want to have shared or haven't shared yet.
Yeah, I'd also, in my own experience, point to the article we wrote about the Streisand effect, or the idea the more that you try to hide information, the more likely people are to try and find it.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Streisand effect, the story goes that a photographer took a picture of Barbara Streisand's mansion and posted it on the web, and she didn't like it being there, so she sued to have the picture taken down. Prior to the lawsuit being filed, there were only a small number of people who actually looked at the image online. But after the after the lawsuit was filed, thousands and thousands of people looked at the image. So she just drew attention to the fact that there was something she didn't like, and it's kind of like driving by a traffic accident. People just had to look.
That's it for questions from mine that I have so far.
Okay. Well, in that case, again, we want to thank you for your attendance here today, your participation. You will be getting a short survey at the end of this, and we do invite you to take advantage of the 30-minute consultation. We're always interested in how different organizations are implementing privacy programs, how they're dealing with breach events, what their planning looks like. And, of course, we're always willing to help out and provide advice. So you can reach us by info@privacyref.com. If you prefer to call, the number is 888-470-1528. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again for your time.